31 years I gave that company, and the day they walked me out the door, my own son-in-law was holding it open for them. He smiled at me. That's the part I keep coming back to. He smiled. My name is Conrad Mallory. I'm 58 years old, and until last spring, I ran the regional operations for a building supply distributor outside Columbus, Ohio. I started there at 27 loading trucks in the yard, and I worked my way up to where I had a corner office and a parking spot with my name stenciled on the curb. I built that branch from a warehouse with a leaking roof into the most profitable territory the company owned. I'm not bragging. I'm telling you, so you understand what it meant when they took it from me, and how a man could be the last one in the room to know his own funeral has already been planned. It started with the phone that wouldn't stop buzzing on my daughter's kitchen counter. We were at Sunday dinner, the way we always were. My wife passed 2 years ago, and Sundays at Megan's house had become the thing I lived for. Megan's my only child. Her husband, Trevor, worked at the same company I did, 2 floors up in corporate finance. I was the one who got him the interview 11 years back, when he was a kid in a borrowed suit who couldn't look me in the eye. I vouched for him. I told the VP this young man is going places. I want you to remember that part, too. So we're at dinner, roast chicken, the grandkids fighting over the last roll, and Trevor's phone is going off against the granite countertop. Buzz, pause, buzz. He kept glancing at it, then at Megan, then back at his plate. At one point, he got up and took it in the other room. And when he came back, his ears were red. I figured it was work. I'd been having those weeks myself, where the numbers wouldn't sit still, and the home office kept asking for projections that didn't make sense. I didn't think anything of it. That was my mistake. The first of many. I'd spent my whole life reading shipping manifests and freight margins, and I never once thought to read the people right in front of me. The next morning, I came in early like always. I liked the building when it was empty, the way the loading bay echoed before the trucks fired up. There was a memo in my inbox marked confidential, sent the night before at 9:14 p.m., from a man named Foster in corporate I'd maybe spoken to twice. The subject line just said, Transition Planning, Columbus. I opened it, expecting to see a forklift lease or a hiring freeze. Instead, I saw my own name, and under it the word Legacy Cost, and under that a spreadsheet I wasn't supposed to have, with a column that projected my salary, my pension obligation, and my accrued benefits, all of it highlighted in red and labeled Savings Opportunity. I read it 3 times. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I want you to know my hands were steady because later, when people asked, they assumed I must have fallen apart right there at my desk. I didn't. 31 years teaches you to stay quiet when the numbers turn against you, because the worst thing you can do is move before you understand the board. The memo had been sent to me by accident. That much was obvious. My address was 1 letter off from a man named Coleman in accounts, and somebody's autofill had betrayed them. But here's what stopped my heart cold. At the bottom of the chain, under all the corporate language, was a forwarded note, and the note was from Trevor, my son-in-law. He'd written, and I remember it word for word, Conrad won't see it coming. He's loyal to a fault and he trusts the family. I can manage the optics with Megan when the time comes. Let's move before the fiscal close. I sat there in my dark office with the loading bay echoing below me, and I understood 3 things at once. They were pushing me out to save money. Trevor knew, and Trevor was planning to manage my own daughter, his own wife, like she was a line item, an obstacle to be handled so that I wouldn't make a scene. I closed the laptop. I went down to the yard, and I watched the first truck of the day pull out, and I made myself breathe. Then I did the only thing 31 years had taught me to do. I started writing things down. For the next week, I went to work, and I was exactly the man they expected me to be. I approved the orders, I ran the Tuesday production meeting, I clapped a kid named Dwayne on the back for hitting his loading targets. And every night I came home to my empty house and I built a file. I'm not a sophisticated man with computers, but I know my own business better than anyone alive, and I started pulling records. Not stealing anything, just printing what was mine to see. The branch P&L, the contracts I personally negotiated, the supplier relationships that lived in my head and nobody else's. That was the thing they'd forgotten. In their spreadsheet with my life highlighted in red, they saw a salary. They didn't see that half the company's biggest accounts only stayed because of handshake trust I'd built over decades. The lumber yard in Dayton signed with us because I drove out to the owner's father's funeral in 2009. The concrete supplier gave us priority during the shortage because I carried them on credit one bad winter when nobody else would. None of that was in the system. It was in me. I called an old friend, a man I'd known since trade school, who'd gone into employment law. I told him everything. I showed him the memo. He read it twice the way I had, and then he took off his glasses and looked at me and said, "Conrad, do you understand what this is? This isn't a layoff. This is a forced exit they've structured to deny you the pension you're 18 months from vesting fully. They're doing it before the fiscal close so it lands in this year's numbers. And your son-in-law put it in writing." He tapped the paper. "Men go to depositions over notes a tenth as bad as this one." I asked him what I should do. He said, "Nothing yet. Let them think the autofill error never happened. Let them keep planning. The longer they plan in writing, the deeper the hole they dig." Then he said something I've thought about every day since. The cruelest part isn't the company. Companies cut costs. That's what they are. The cruelest part is the one who knows you, who shares your table, who looks your daughter in the eye every night, and chooses the company over you. That man you can't sue, but you can let him hang himself. So I waited. I want to tell you about that wait, because the comments I've read on stories like mine always ask the same thing. Why didn't he just confront them? He had the proof. And I understand the impulse, but you have to understand what was actually at stake. It wasn't just my job. It was my pension, the thing my wife and I had counted on for 30 years. It was my daughter's marriage. Because if I blew it all up in one furious afternoon, Megan would have to choose, and a daughter forced to choose between her father and her husband loses no matter which way she turns. And it was my own dignity, which I was not going to spend on a tantrum in a conference room. So I did the slow thing, the hard thing. I let them keep talking. Over the next 2 weeks, the picture filled in. There was a woman named Whitcomb who'd been brought in as a consultant. Except she wasn't really a consultant. I figured out she was already lined up to take my title at 2/3 my salary. No pension. A younger and cheaper version of me. There were calendar invites I wasn't on. Alignment meetings about the Columbus transition. And every one of them had Trevor's name in the attendee list. My son-in-law wasn't just aware. He was the architect. He was the inside man who'd assured corporate that the old man would go quietly because the old man trusted family. The hardest day was the Sunday in the middle of it. Megan made pot roast. The grandkid showed me a school project, a diorama of the solar system with the planets all the wrong sizes, and I told them it was the best thing I'd ever seen, and I meant it. And across the table sat Trevor, asking me how things were at the branch. Was the home office treating me right? Did I think I'd take that long overdue vacation soon? He looked me dead in the eye when he said it. "You've earned a rest, Conrad." I smiled and said maybe I would, maybe in the spring, and inside I felt something I'd never felt toward another human being in my life. Not rage, something colder. The understanding that the man holding my grandson on his knee had written, in plain words, that he would manage my daughter's grief like a public relations problem. I went home that night and I didn't sleep. I sat in my wife's reading chair, the one I can't bring myself to give away, and I talked to her out loud like a crazy person. I asked her what she'd want me to do, and I swear to you, sitting in that dark room, I could hear what she'd say. Because she said it to me 100 times when I'd come home angry over some slight at work. She'd say, "Conrad, don't get even, get clear, get clear." So that's what I decided to do. Here is what most people don't know about a man who spent his life moving freight. We are patient by nature. You cannot rush a supply chain. You learn that the right thing done at the wrong moment is worse than the wrong thing, and that timing is the only real power a man ever has. The memo went out before the fiscal close because corporate wanted my pension off the books this year. That meant they had a deadline. And a deadline is a weakness if you're the one who knows the calendar better than they do. I went to see my lawyer friend again, and this time I brought a plan. I documented every account that stayed because of me personally. I'd made quiet calls, not threats, nothing improper, just old friends checking in. To the 3 biggest customers in my territory: the lumberyard, the concrete supplier, a regional home builder who'd been with us 19 years. I didn't tell them what was happening. I just asked in a roundabout way how they felt about the company's service lately, whether the relationship still meant something to them. And every one of them, in their own words, told me the same thing. They were with us because of me. If I went, they'd be shopping the market by summer. My lawyer wrote that down. Then he had me write a letter. Not an angry letter. A clear one. It laid out, in calm and lawyerly language, that I was aware of the transition plan. That I was aware it had been structured to land before my pension fully vested. that I was in possession of written communications acknowledging the intent, and that I was prepared to retire on my own terms, with full pension, a severance reflecting 31 years, and a clean reference, or I was prepared to let the matter, and the customer relationships attached to it, take their natural course. We didn't send it yet. We held it, because I wanted one more thing first. I wanted Trevor on the record. The chance came at the worst possible place, Megan's birthday. She turned 34 that April, and we did it at her house, the whole family. Balloons the grandkids had blown up until they were dizzy. And at some point in the evening, Trevor pulled me aside, out onto the back deck where the grill was still warm, 2 beers in his hand, and he handed me one, and he said, man to man, that he'd been thinking, and that was my anniversary coming up at the company. Maybe it was a good time for me to think about the future. Slow down. Enjoy life. He said the company would take care of me. He actually used those words. And he said, and this is the part I'll never forget, you don't want to be the guy who holds on too long, Conrad. You don't want to make it ugly. For Megan's sake. For Megan's sake. He invoked my daughter, his wife, as the reason I should go quietly into the loss of everything I'd built. And I stood there on that deck with a beer I didn't drink, and I said, very quietly, you're right, Trevor. I don't want to make it ugly. And he relaxed. I watched the relief go through his whole body. He thought he'd won. What he didn't know was that my phone was in my shirt pocket, and it had been recording since he walked me out onto that deck. I'd started at the moment he handed me the beer, because after 31 years, you develop an instinct for when a man is about to tell you something he'll later deny. In my state, with one party's consent, that recording was legal. I'd checked. Of course I'd checked. I'd check everything. That's why I lasted 31 years, and that's why a kid in a borrowed suit thought he could outmaneuver me. The Monday after the birthday, my lawyer and I sent the letter, and we attached, not the memo, we held that back, but a simple line noting that we possessed both written and recorded confirmation of the transition's intent and timing. We addressed it not to Foster, not to the consultant Whitcomb, but to the general counsel of the entire company, the top lawyer, the one person whose whole job was to keep things exactly like this from ever seeing daylight. The response came in 2 days, not from HR, from the general counsel himself, on a Wednesday morning, requesting a meeting to discuss your continued value to the organization and an appropriate recognition of your tenure. I read that line and I laughed out loud in my empty kitchen. The first time I'd laughed in a month. My continued value. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been a savings opportunity highlighted in red. Now I was value. The meeting was the strangest hour of my professional life. I sat across a long table from 3 people who had, in writing, planned to throw me out a door, and they were all suddenly very interested in my health, my family, my thoughts on the future of the branch. The general counsel did most of the talking. He never once admitted wrongdoing. Lawyers never do. But the offer he slid across the table told me everything. Full pension, vested immediately, no 18-month wait, a severance of 2 years' salary, a consulting arrangement that paid me to keep the customer relationships warm for another year on my own schedule for my own home, and a reference letter so glowing I could have franked it. I want to tell you, I gloated. I didn't. I sat there, and I felt the strangest emptiness because winning didn't give me back what I'd actually lost. I signed the papers. I shook the hands. And the whole time, I thought about the one name that had never come up in that room. Trevor's. Because here's the thing about the recording in the memo. I never used them against my son-in-law directly. I never had to. The company, scrambling to make me happy and make the problem disappear, did what companies do. They needed someone to have made a mistake. They needed a story where corporate had been misinformed, where the aggressive timeline had come from below, from someone who'd misrepresented the situation. They needed a man to throw under the bus. I didn't have to push Trevor under it. They drove it over him on their own. He was reassigned within the month to a satellite office in a city he hated, a lateral move that everyone in corporate finance understood to be the opposite of a promotion. His mentor in the home office, the same VP I'd once impressed 11 years ago, stopped returning his calls. The architecture of the whole scheme, when the company needed it to belong to somebody, came to rest on the son-in-law who assured everyone the old man would go quietly. The old man had not gone quietly, and the man who'd promised he would was left holding the blueprint with his own handwriting on it. The part I dreaded most was Megan. I'd kept her out of all of it, the way you keep a child away from a stove. But you cannot hide a forced relocation. A marriage put under that kind of pressure She came to my house alone on a Saturday. No kids, and she sat at my kitchen table, and she asked me straight out, "Dad, what happened at the company? Trevor won't talk about it, and now we have to move. And he's not sleeping, and something is wrong, and nobody will tell me anything." And I had to make the hardest decision of the whole ordeal. Harder than the weight. Harder than the deck. I told her the truth. Not the cold version. The whole version. The whole version. I showed her the memo. I let her read her husband's words about managing the optics, about her in her father's life. I watched my daughter's face go through everything mine had gone through a month before, and it was the worst thing I've ever had to watch. Worse than her mother's hospital room, because at least that grief was nobody's fault. This one had a name, and she'd married it. She didn't scream. She got very still, the way I do. She's more mine than I ever let myself believe. And after a long time, she said, "He looked you in the eye at my birthday." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "He held my son and he planned this." And I said, "Yes." And then my daughter put her head down on my kitchen table, and she cried in a way I hadn't heard since she was small. And I held the back of her head the way I did when she was small. And I did not say a single word, because there was nothing to say the truth hadn't already said better. What happened to Megan's marriage is hers to tell, not mine, and I won't put it on display. I'll only say that trust, once a man has written down in plain words how little he holds it, does not grow back, no matter how the seasons turn. She made her own decisions, in her own time, clear-eyed and on her own terms. She's my daughter. She got clear. I retired that summer, on my own terms, with everything I'd earned, and not a dollar less. I kept the consulting arrangement just long enough to walk the 3 big accounts personally over to a younger woman at the branch I'd quietly mentored for years. Not the consultant they'd lined up, but a real one, somebody who'd earned it. And I made sure those handshake relationships transferred to someone who understood that they were handshakes, not line items. Then I let it go. I sold the big house. There were too many rooms in it that only my wife's absence lived in. And I'd stayed too long out of a kind of loyalty to a ghost who'd have been the first to tell me to move on. I bought a small place up near Lake Erie, the kind of town where the hardware store owner knows your name by the second week. I learned to fish, badly. I take my grandkids on the weekends Megan can spare them, and we catch nothing and eat too much ice cream, and they think I'm the most interesting man alive, which is the only promotion I've ever cared about. People hear this story and they want it to be about revenge. They want the part where I made him pay. But I didn't make him pay. I just stopped protecting him from the weight of his own words, and the weight did the rest. That's not revenge. Revenge is something you do. This was something I refused to do. Refused to take the fall. Refused to go quietly. Refused to spend my dignity on rage when patience would do the work cleaner. The memo arrived in my inbox by accident, 1 letter off. Sometimes I think about how close I came to never seeing it, how I'd have shaken Trevor's hand on that deck and taken the quiet exit and the half pension and the lie, and gone to my grave grateful to a man who was managing my grief like a press release. 1 transposed letter is all that stood between me and that life. I don't believe in much anymore, but I believe in the smallness of the thing that saved me, and I've made my peace with not understanding why. A man spends 31 years thinking loyalty is a currency, that if you put enough of it in, it pays out at the end. It doesn't. Loyalty isn't an investment. It's a gift, and the only thing it ever guarantees you is that you'll know at the end which people gave it back. My wife gave it back every day of her life. My daughter gave it back at my kitchen table. The company never had it to give, and I should have known that. In the borrowed suit kit I vouched for, spent 11 years pretending and 1 autofill error confessing. I'm 58. I've got a small house, a bad fishing rod, 2 grandkids, and a daughter who calls me clear-eyed and unafraid. I lost a corner office and a name stenciled on a curb. I'd make that trade 1,000 times over and never count the cost. Some mornings on the lake, before the sun's all the way up, I talk to my wife out loud, and I tell her I finally learned the thing she'd been trying to teach me. Don't get even. Get clear. I got clear, and it turns out, clear is the only thing worth getting. The email landed in my inbox because of 1 transposed letter, and I stopped trying to make sense of why a thing that small decides a whole life. What I can make sense of is everything that came after, because none of it was luck. When Trevor wrote that I'd go quietly because I trusted family, he was betting on the wrong thing. He thought loyalty made a man slow. He never understood that a man who's kept his word for 31 years has built a kind of steadiness that doesn't break when the floor falls out from under it. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Out on the lake in the mornings, Trevor put his plan in writing because he believed no one was watching. That single choice, made in the dark at 9:14 at night, is the thing that buried him. I didn't bury him. He handed me the shovel and then stood in the hole. Foster and the rest of them needed someone to blame the moment I refused to disappear, and the man who promised them an easy old man was the only name left on the page. That's not revenge. That's just weight finding the lowest point, the way water does. What saved me wasn't anger. Anger would have had me storming a conference room the morning that memo arrived, and I'd have walked out with half a pension and a story about how I lost my temper. What saved me was the patience to wait, the clear head to write everything down instead of shouting it, and the refusal to spend my last shred of dignity on a tantrum. There's a strength that has nothing to do with how loud you can get. It's a strength to stay quiet, to keep your hands steady, to let a liar keep talking until his own words do the work for you. And there's the harder kind of strength, the one I needed at my kitchen table when Megan asked me for the truth. The easy thing would have been to protect her from it. But you don't protect the people you love by handing them a comfortable lie. You owe them the truth even when it breaks them, because a person built on the truth heals, and a person built on a kindness that's really a lie just rots slower. She got clear because I gave her something real to stand on. If you take anything from an old man who fishes badly and loves his grandkids too much, take this. Be the person whose words still mean something when no one is checking. Be patient enough to let time reveal what panic would only hide. And when the floor drops out, and someday it will, don't get even. Get clear. Clear is the only ground that holds.